Hello and welcome to this special edition of Biz Talk, where we delve into the Belt and Road Initiative and the pivotal role of the private sector. We will explore how businesses participating in the BRI can drive innovation, stimulate economic growth, and facilitate the development of sustainable infrastructure. Our featured guest is Sanda Ojiambo, Assistant Secretary General and CEO and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact, the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. With her extensive experience and leadership in promoting sustainable development and responsible business practices, Ms. Ojiambo has played a crucial role in advancing the United Nations goals. Well, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today. So, Ms. Ojiambo, let's talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, which is celebrating the 10th anniversary. How important is engagement with the private sector to the initiative's success?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Guan, and it's a real pleasure to be with you for this important conversation. As you mentioned, it's the marking of the 10th anniversary of that, and there's been tremendous engagement. I think $1 trillion of investments in Belt and Road projects, over 3,000 projects around the world, from places as diverse as Serbia, as Argentina, as Ghana, for example, and Pakistan. So it's really great to see the impact that the Belt and Road Initiative has had. In this is the private sector. I mean, I think there's no part of the world that has fully been able to realize economic growth and social development without the private sector. I think it's absolutely important, not only as contractors, but also as providers of finance, as innovators, providers of technology. But now more than ever in the work that we hear at the Global Compact, the private sector is really keen to work side by side with government and advance some of the national development priorities. So for us and at the Global Compact, we're very keen and excited to always see private sector engage in policy support and programming for government. It's a very important component for us.
We're talking about the guidance and assessment tools for private companies trying to accelerate their sustainable development. How do they leverage these tools in their pursuit of sustainable future?
Yeah, I mean, first there's two parts to it. So at the Global Compact, we have what we call our 10 principles, which for us are fundamental principles for business to be sustainable. It talks about how you manage your environmental footprint, how you respect and promote labor rights and human rights, provide decent work conditions and living wages, and also how you aim to combat corruption in all of its forms. But as a guiding North Star, and within the realms of the UN, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. And when the goals were formed in 2015, the call to action for business was to use the Sustainable Development Goals as an investment framework. So business can find an investment opportunity in all of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think when those two come together, it gives business a much longer horizon. We always believe that business cannot succeed when the society around it is failing. So it's very important for business to look at how it can invest in the climate transition. It can invest in renewable energy transitions. It can invest in food system transitions. Of course, issues such as infrastructure, very important. That's SDG 9 and a key focus of the Belt and Road Initiative as well.
And the Belt and Road Initiative Conference is aiming to lay out the future directions, and sustainability is one of the priorities in the future. So as an expert on sustainable development, how do you assess the level of sustainability of the BRI, and how can it further catalyze its future development in this area?
Yeah, well, I think that is obviously done between a bilateral, government funding and assessment framework. But certainly, I think some of the things that you'd want to look at in terms of sustainability, first, I think, is the environmental footprint. How carbon friendly or climate friendly are these projects? A lot of them as infrastructure. Have they disrupted the natural environment, for example, or do they aim to also go back and restore and rebuild environment when that has happened? Has there been community displacement, for example, and what does that look like? I think another element of sustainability is the extent to which local communities are involved, engage perhaps in the project, and also support the project in the longer term. From a workforce perspective, and I talk about this related to our principles, for example, what has been the labor force engagement, the terms of that work, looking at occupational health and safety, for example, looking at how well projects are integrated into local economies. And of course, there's obviously the financial sustainability of all of the projects. So there's many ways that you could take a look at it. And then ultimately, what is the longevity of the projects? Because these are large investments, significant capital investments, and very important to make sure that they serve the populations at hand.
So tell us more about how you work with the private sector to accelerate sustainable development. What do you think are the biggest challenges?
Right. So the UN Global Compact, first of all, is a membership organization. We currently have a growing membership of close to about 20,000 businesses around the world. And these businesses sign on to adhere to our 10 principles, but also help us deliver the sustainable development goals. And as I said, we look at them as business opportunities. We work with businesses in 4 different ways. We help them to learn and understand what the principles and sustainable development goals are. We connect businesses with a global network of 20,000 and with the convening power of the UN. It's an excellent platform to bring businesses together, also with government to discuss. We also provide learning and leverage platforms, advocacy platforms for more advanced businesses. I think CEO leadership is very important in the current work that we do. And we also work with businesses to help them report transparently about the progress, the challenges, and the opportunities. So those are 4 things that we do with business. I think most importantly and most exciting for us is how we use our platforms to advocate, for increased engagement of business, but also for public-private dialogue between businesses and governments.
Can you elaborate on some of the programs that can accelerate public and private partnerships?
I think first is to look at what are the areas of mutuality that bring businesses together. So some things, for example, and it really depends on where you are and country specific. But by and large, I think CEOs will talk about a couple of things across the world. One is just to understand regulation, and there's a fast changing regulation environment. Oftentimes, this is great. It makes businesses do what they need to do. For example, issues around climate and decarbonization, there's some regulation around that. But other times, regulations are punitive to business. So a lot of the public-private dialogue that we see in countries around businesses wanting to dialogue with government around the ease of doing business, on taxation, on regulatory reporting. As we know right now, for example, in Europe, it's a fast-changing and dynamic regulatory environment. And, there's always the opportunity to dialogue around what is most efficient and effective for business. Other regulations or other public-private dialogue issues around taxation, for example, it's around engagement of businesses within the national development plans. And actually, one of the most positive, I think, is when businesses come together with government to submit their voluntary national reviews. Those are reviews that governments provide into the United Nations to demonstrate their progress around the Sustainable Development Goals.
What is your assessment of BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, in foster public-private partnerships?
Right, and as I said, it's the 10th anniversary. I mean, there's been quite a scale and scope of diverse projects from around the world. It is evident, obviously, that there is great partnership between the government of China and, the other countries where these projects have been implemented. So I think by and large, obviously, that engagement has progressed well. I can't speak to all of the public-private engagement, and I think it's very clear that private sector has been engaged. I think some of the things we heard from the steering committee on which I sit is there's certainly more opportunity as we look forward to engage more local and national companies in the BRI, in the construction, in the longevity and the sustainability. And that was one of the issues raised by a number of the steering committee members that we have.
Well, one thing about the private sector is they can find market-oriented solution to a lot of issues. What do you think are the most promising areas for private sector to provide solutions to our sustainability issues?
Yeah. I mean, there's a number. For sure, first of all, technology is really driving a lot of the opportunities in the world. And I think, it ranges from where you sit in the world, AI and, a lot of quantum computing solutions can really help move forward on issues that are more advanced, on healthcare, on financial inclusion, certainly on envisioning what the future of the world looks like. But on the other hand, I think there's some very simple things in ways in which you can advance technology in education, in healthcare, in agriculture. So there are many ways that technology can be deployed, and I think we need to use more of that simply to move us away from the brick and mortar way of looking at development, but also seeing how we can advance. So for me, technology, innovation, workforce partnerships would be really critical.
And let's turn to international cooperation. As the world emerges from the pandemic, many economies are hit hard during the past 3 years. And in some places of the world, sustainability took a back seat. What do you think are the biggest challenges in the global cooperation on sustainable development?
Yeah. So I firmly believe, and we've heard this from our CEOs around the world, is that it really is important to maintain a strong and robust multilateral framework for businesses to thrive. If you think of any multinational, they need open borders. They need the ability to source inputs, to get the best of global talent, to sell their products and services. So during the 3 years when we're in the heat of the pandemic, for example, I think businesses were truly advocating for a stronger multilateral framework for their businesses and really for their supplies and for their supply chain. So I think it's very, very important. I think businesses cross borders, and that's an important opportunity for them.
Mm-hmm. The Forward Faster initiative was officially launched in September this year. How do you envision it to make a tangible difference in accelerating sustainable development?
So, this September marked an important reflection point for the United Nations. In our high-level week, we talked about the fact that the Sustainable Development Goals might be halfway there, but we're definitely not halfway done. I think the events of the last 3 years, we spoke about the COVID pandemic, crisis around the world, the climate crisis, have really slowed down what could have been excellent momentum on the Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN Global Compact, we took the opportunity to launch a campaign, Forward Faster, to provide a platform for our businesses to drive forward faster on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we set ambitious targets around areas where we believe business can make a significant impact on the Sustainable Development Goals. These are things such as climate action, gender equality, water resilience, sustainable finance. And we think that if businesses engage at a much higher level and bring together their supply chains and their value chains, we will be able to move progress on the SDGs.
Well, these are very important goals. How confident are you that the initiative can deliver?
Well, I think as confident as we need to be, because if not the Sustainable Development Goals as a global framework, I think the question is, what else? And I do feel that, we have mobilized our private sector well. We definitely need to get more companies on board. We need to drive that ambition forward. The goals that we've set are not any separate or different from national development plans. Private sector is a key part and a key implementer along with government on national development plans. So we see a great synergy in this opportunity.
And how would you like Chinese companies to engage in this initiative?
Absolutely. So here in China, we have a local network, UN Global Compact China. It's part of the UN family here. We have about 872 companies that are part of the Global Compact here in China. We want more Chinese companies to join. We have state-owned enterprises as well as private enterprise. And many of them are huge, significant players in the global economy, significant players in the local economy. So they're able to shape and influence, for example, I think what happens in China. We need more companies, more state-owned enterprises and private sector to do the same.
And a lot of Chinese companies are working closely with their foreign counterparts in certain sectors. In your opinion, how can BRI further accelerate technology cooperation and promote shared prosperity?
I think the very fact that BRI spans borders and spans, I think it's over 130 countries. Again, that type of partnership with a strong public-private partnership element is very critical. Technology transfer, very important. Skills transfer, capacity building across borders, I think is absolutely very important. And then really there's the fact that infrastructure, by and large, builds bridges. BRI is not simply about infrastructure. It brings with it job creation, income creation, the opportunity for employment. The developments and the investments are not simply in bridges. We've seen education, we've seen health, we've seen a number of different investments, water and water stewardship. So I think the scale and the scope of the BRI has truly the opportunity to transform not just development, but certainly multilateralism as well.
And a lot of Chinese companies are investing in Africa, which has enormous potential for sustainable development. Could you elaborate on how the GABI can further promote sustainable development and economic growth across the African continent, and how can companies leverage this framework?
You know, the African continent, I think, has the opportunity to allow the world to solve many of the existing problems. We talk about a climate transition. The African continent has an abundance of solar energy and opportunities for renewables. We talk about the food systems transition, large amount of arable land, labor force, etc. You know, talk about a digital transition. You have a youthful population, you have markets. And so, you know, Africa for me represents a huge opportunity, not just for itself, but for the world. So I think that's one. You talked about GABI, the Global Africa Business Initiative. It's a platform that we launched at the UN Global Compact 2 years ago, really aiming to help reposition the narrative around the African continent. It's often seen as one framed through, you know, relief and development and challenge, but yet from everything I've said, you know, huge market, huge consumer market, youthful market, abundance of resources. I think the opportunity exists for people to see Africa for the investment destination that it is, and also to note the immense potential of the private sector in helping drive that investment forward. So when we've met over 2 years, we most recently met in September and had a forum that focused on energy and the energy transition, inclusive growth and trade, very important because Africa is a huge trade market for itself, but also for the world. And we also looked at digital transformation. And those 3 things I think we determined could really drive forward Africa's development and provide solutions for the world.
I know GABI is providing support for companies to navigate the unique challenges and opportunities in Africa. And how can Chinese companies better make use of this?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, we did have some Chinese companies in attendance. We do feel that, you know, GABI is not only about Africa, it's about people who partner with Africa and who invest in Africa. We do want to see the platform and the engagement grow much larger. Again, we've already talked about some of the relationships between China and many countries on the African continent. We see the opportunity to strengthen that, but also for Chinese companies to highlight, you know, the investment opportunities in the various African countries and showcase also the successes of those investments and, you know, help attract further investment, further support for the further partnership with the African private sector as well.
And one thing is particularly needed is financing. And how can the government better mobilize the private investment into sustainability areas?
Very important. I think, you know, we've talked a lot about the need to really raise the amount of investment capital that is important, not simply financing projects or, you know, but really investing in what is the potential. A lot has been said, and our Secretary General talks a lot about the need for reform in the multilateral lending system and, you know, for a bit more equitable and inclusive lending infrastructure for many economies around the world, in the developing world and particularly on the African continent. So I think that, number one, is the first opportunity. The second is to be able to direct capital to projects that are sustainable and inclusive. And I think that is also very important. There's an abundance of projects that we've talked about around climate, investing in climate transition, investing in the energy transition, and investing certainly in food systems transition. So one, it's, you know, looking at how we can avail more capital equitably for investments on the continent. Secondly is preparing and ensuring there's this pool of bankable and investable projects that can then provide a platform for investment in the continent.
How do you think about the sustainability of the financing related to BRI projects?
So a little bit of a complex one, I think, from our end. We haven't really gone into the analysis of that. I think where we've come in from our side with the Global Compact is to make sure that that financing, one, is equitable, is sustainable, and certainly, you know, lends to the overall sustainability of projects. What is very clear, and going back to my earlier comment about the opportunities on the African continent, the desire to leverage more private investment, I think the desire to make sure that that investment opportunity is equitable will certainly help drive BRI and other projects much further.
Transparency is a critical issue when it comes to sustainable development, when it comes to a green agenda. How do you think we should step up the rule setting and standard setting as we are garnering cooperation across different continents?
Yeah, transparency I think is absolutely very important for longevity. I'll look at it from two angles. First, from a sustainability angle, there's always the need to make sure that we can transparently report on progress, challenges, and opportunities. Obviously, at the national level or macro level, that happens at when one does project evaluations. But I think also within companies, and that's an area within which we work, is to encourage companies every year to take stock of what they're able to do. I know some of the sustainability reporting is regulated or mandated. We look at a more voluntary approach, but a very rigorous and thorough approach to make sure that companies can look at a couple of things: their carbon or their climate footprint, their respect and promotion of rights, whether or not they are actually actively promoting anti-corruption measures within their work, and then other more sectoral elements for reporting. Absolutely very important. A lot of focus right now goes obviously on the environmental elements because they're very scientifically driven, but of equal measure and importance are some of the social elements of these projects around inclusivity, around decent work and economic growth, I think are very important. And then the governance of projects, I think, is one that we know can truly impact both negatively and positively how long and how sustainable projects are.
And the countries around the world are at different development stages and they have different priorities. How do you bridge the gap between different countries when it comes to sustainability?
Right. I think for us, standards are standards. I don't think you can say one country can have lesser ambition on climate than others. We live in one world. And, if there's a climate crisis on one part of the world, we actually feel it on the other side as well. When there's political instability on one side of the world, we feel it globally. The world is a village, and it's a very small village. Look at the pandemic, for example. No matter where you were in the world, we were all impacted. The current climate crisis plays out every day in different countries in the same way. So for us, and when we look at private sector, we think it's very important that we can hold businesses to account at the same level, no matter what the issues at hand are. I do acknowledge it's a very different reporting or accountability environment for a large multinational as it is for a small and medium enterprise, but we work at the Global Compact to support and to handhold businesses of all sizes to enable them to be accountable. I think for smaller businesses, if you start now developing a culture of transparency, of accountability, and of high ambition, first of all, it makes you more attractive to providers of capital. It makes you a more attractive business partner, certainly a more attractive partner for overall longer-term sustainability projects. So we don't necessarily differentiate. I think what is more important is understanding the value of reporting and being transparent.
And there are talks about climate justice, and some countries are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. Do you think that developing countries and developed countries have their different share of responsibility and financially because they're different economy?
Yeah, and that's one where I think, in the climate conferences, the COPs as we call them, that debate comes up. As you may recall in the last
forever.
COP, it goes on for a while. As you may recall in the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, the question of loss and damage ultimately came up. We hadn't even scratched the surface on the adaptation funding. And of course, there's the big climate mitigation debate. There's also climate financing. It's a broad continuum. I think, one of the key things is to just make sure that we can hold governments to account for the commitments that they have made around climate. And I think that's the key issue because a lot of those commitments remain unfulfilled, quite frankly. Earlier in September, I was in the Africa Climate Summit, where African leaders came together to really advance a position around climate and climate action for the African continent. It was very clear, indeed, there are unfulfilled commitments, but I think from the African continent, the leadership spoke and said they have a desire for Africa not to be viewed as a victim, but simply as an investment solution for this very important climate crisis. So I think there's an acknowledgement that there are unfulfilled promises, but also an understanding that we must seize opportunities and move forward. So yes, it's not equal across the playing field, but certainly I think there's an increased drive to find more solutions. Underpinning all of this is climate finance and the real need to invest in climate transformation and climate transitions.
And that brings a broader issue of international cooperation on shared challenges. At the just concluded UN General Assembly, Secretary General Guterres actually said the global governance becomes so fractured that it is unable to respond to our challenges such as climate change. What is your review on the current globalization and their ability to drive concerted efforts?
Yeah, very critical. And let me go back to the piece that you mentioned with the SG, Secretary Guterres, around climate, for example. I think the facts and statistics tell us that about 80% of the emissions come from 20% of the world, but yet it is a global catastrophe. So the question here is, how can we leverage or exert enough pressure on that 20%, and primarily it's from large G20 economies, to really make the commitments to mitigate and to decarbonize at the scale and scope that is needed. With that, then the rest of the world can then proceed on their own mitigation plans, look forward into climate adaptation and build resilience to go forward. But for that, you need a very united, obviously, a framework to be able to do that, and not have a fractured and split world as you've talked about. So I think those are some of the challenges that we do face around it. But as I said earlier, the world is too interconnected to be able to do that. I think SG has always called for, rebuilding of the multilateral framework. It will solve many things, as I said. The climate crisis has no borders. The need for renewable energy also has no borders. Similarly, the food systems transition is very important. So global food security comes into play. Issues such as digital transformation we talked about that are absolutely borderless. And so it's imperative really for, I think, all of the sustainable development goals and ambition that we can use the multilateral framework as a true opportunity for cooperation.
So, Ms. Ojiambo, you are a role model for a lot of young women who want to make a difference in their career. How should we further promote gender equality and empower women in our pursuit of a more sustainable future?
Well, first, thank you for your kind words. I mean, I'm truly honored to be able to do the work that I do, and certainly over the last few years working at the UN and the Global Compact has been a true privilege for me. But to address what is obviously a glaring gender imbalance, at least in the workplace, I think first of all, it takes two. So, women's empowerment, women participation is really about having male allies in the workforce, but also having females who can also give a hand up to younger women aiming to rise up in the workplace and mentor and coach them. But you need both genders. I always say that addressing gender imbalance is not simply for women, it's for both genders. I think that is the first. But having said that, I acknowledge there's a lot of systemic barriers that prevent women rising up in the workplace. There's bias, and I think we face that every day. There's also issues around workplace sensitivity. There's issues around skills building. There's issues around, how we can, appreciate the life cycle of a woman and not, punish her if she needs to go and raise a family, and how you balance those two, going along. So there's many issues that I think can be addressed systemically, but I think most important is understanding that women have the same skills, the same skill set, and the same opportunities as men do to be able to deliver in the workplace. I think that's first. Having bold leadership that is able to advocate for women and make sure that at their management and leadership table there are women, not simply as a token number, but women who actually actively participate, I think is absolutely important. Statistics actually show that when you have a leadership team or a board or a management team that is more diverse, companies actually do better. And I think that's it. But what I would say to every woman who has the opportunity to do so in the workplace is, to reflect on how you can create a pathway for the next generation, and to create that pathway not simply by yourself, but certainly with male allies in your business, and certainly with the whole workplace environment. I think that is probably the best possible opportunity. I always say, especially in the technology field, when I talk to younger women and they say, we would love to be engineers, but we haven't seen enough women engineers. We'd love to, work in all of these areas. And so we do need to be able to create the opportunities to role model and provide a really supportive environment for that change to happen.
Well, we have to leave it there. Many thanks again to our esteemed guest, Sanda Ojiambo, for sharing her invaluable insights on mobilizing businesses to advance sustainable development goals through initiatives like the UN Global Compact. It's clear there are still challenges to align priorities across countries and sectors. But through open dialogue and collaborative action, the private sector can act as a catalyst for transformative changes towards a resilient future. And the Belt and Road Initiative demonstrates the amplifying effect when governments, companies, and communities come together around a shared vision. And that's all for this special edition for BizTalk, exploring the Belt and Road Initiative and the critical role of private sector engagement. Thank you for being with us. Until next time. Bye for now.